This fire season was a real scrap. It was almost like having an opponent that would go down but come back up again, always coming up. No matter how hard you hit it, it kept coming back at you, kind of like a scrappy opponent.
200 new fires one day, 300 the next, 400 the day after that, and that was a very unusual situation to have the entire West engaged at the same time with so many fires burning.
25 to 30 mile an hour winds. We knew it was coming. We had to sit here and wait for it. And it started moving the fire very actively. And we had some houses up here in Cedar Creek which were right in the way of it had it kept going.
In total, this is going to be a year of an enormously large expenditure for fire suppression.
Anytime we go at these things, we need to understand that we are sending people in harm's way.
Fire. Every year, Montanans need to learn how to live with forest fires. And not since the summer of 1988 did the fires burn in the Montana woods as they did this year. For the next hour, we are going to relive the summer fire season of 1994 and talk with those who were directly responsible for helping put the fires out, from smoke jumpers to homeowners. We'll also find out how Montanans are learning to live more effectively in the urban-wildland interface. And we'll take a look back at Montana's most famous and deadliest firefighting disasters. The summer fire season of 1994, slow to start, slow to end. But it was a season that many believed was on the way. Remember the fire season of 1988? One of the worst fire seasons on record. And forecasters knew early on that 1994 could be even worse. It was a possibility that seemed unlikely since the summer of '93 was so rainy. But low snowpack left forests dry this summer.
This year, with the lack of snowpack over the winter, that's created a deficit moisture situation in the fuels, and that gives us fair amount of concern. So we're watching the weather patterns, especially here in May and June, to see how well the fuels recover.
For a time, things were quiet in Montana. As wildfires burned in other parts of the West, Montana firefighters left home for other destinations. Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Crews from Montana and Idaho were fighting a wildfire on Storm King Mountain. It was a blaze that looked almost harmless until July 6th. That night we heard there had been a terrible accident. 14 firefighters were killed when the fire suddenly came to life. A phone call to Region 1 Fire Suppression Officer Joe Wagenfear that night made us suspect that perhaps a Montana firefighter may have been hurt. And when the victims' names were released, Hamilton's Don Mackey, a smoke jumper, was among the dead.
There'll be time to find the answers. Today we must join in sympathy and solidarity with the families of Don Mackey and all the victims of this fire. And we must also join in gratitude to Don Mackey for the lives he saved at the price of his own. As the scripture tells us, greater love hath no man than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends.
Mackey died a hero that day. And although later there would be debate over who was responsible for the loss of life on Storm King, nobody doubted that Mackey left safety to try to save his fellow firefighters. He would be the first of 3 Montana firefighters to die this summer, illustrating that it is indeed a dangerous job. One man who knows that lesson well is veteran smoke jumper Wayne Williams, who shed some insight into life fighting fire.
I was at Storm King that day. I wasn't with that group of people fighting the fire. We were coming as reinforcements in a school bus, and we had just gotten to where the there was a heliport that they were supplying those people on the hillside with. We just got into that heliport with our little yellow school bus, and it was right about 4 p.m. and we just happened to witness the fire explode. And we did not really think that anybody was in danger. We assumed, like we always do, that everybody will keep out of harm's way, and that there'll be some good stories to talk about later. And we didn't think there was a problem until some of the smoke had lifted and we saw some shelters that were deployed. And we were a good 1.5 miles away, but we could see those shelters shining in the sun. Then we knew there was something up, and that's when we got on the radio and tried to start trying to contact people. Even though we couldn't get a hold of Don on the radio, none of us thought any of the jumpers had died. And maybe it's pretty egotistical for us to think, well, maybe it was the hot shots or the hell attack people. We just couldn't believe it, you know. And we finally got a hold, when the fire finally calmed down enough for the people who did survive, and then the people who had escaped the fire through the what they refer to as the escape route or the escape canyon, and came around to where we were, we started piecing things together, and we started realizing that it was probably a little more serious than we thought. And that's when we decided that there were fatalities, and we better face it and go up there and try to search for anybody we could. In my mind, when it first happened, you know, of course, I was really bummed out, and I had some pretty bad dreams for a while, but I knew that it was all going to be okay. It was just a matter of time. I knew that eventually, you know, that if I gave myself the opportunity to realize that time would take care of it, I'd be okay. And that's basically what had happened. I very rarely think about it day by day, where before I was thinking about it every single day. Really what fire is, it's sort of like us. I mean, it consumes like we do. It has a lifespan like we do. It's affected by its environment like we are, meaning wind and terrain. They can be small and they can be large. They can be good and they can be bad. They can be very beneficial to the forest and to the community, and sometimes they can be exactly the opposite. And that's what makes fire so difficult to manage.
Montana firefighters were laying in wait for the fire season to start. Montanans were still reeling from the tragedy on Storm King. On the horizon, the fire season approached. More when Fire in the Big Sky continues. The 1994 Montana fire season was a season that many thought would never end. It did, of course, but not until October, long after the flames should have been out. The fire season is one that you're not hearing about on the news anymore, but evidence of its destruction is seen throughout Montana's countryside. The fire season literally burned itself into our memories, not only because thousands of Montana acres burned, but because 3 Montanans lost their lives, as did many others while fighting the fires this summer. July 1st, a blaze called the Robertson Fire breaks out southeast of the small community of Paradise in Sanders County. It quickly spreads over 1,500 acres, although flames actually will burn just half that amount. Also, as the first fire of the season, it draws 150 firefighters, just in time for the 4th of July weekend.
It was very scary. If the wind hadn't changed when it did, it would have taken all of our buildings, everything that we had.
The Robertson blaze does not offer stiff resistance. Fire crews contain it within a few days, but the fire foreshadows trends that will continue all summer long. For one thing, most of the people battling Robertson have come from outside Montana. Montana crews are in the desert Southwest, dealing with fires there. For another, this is an expensive fire. Suppression costs will total roughly $1.5 million. July 25th, less than 3 weeks after the Robertson fire is declared contained, dry thunderstorms touch off more than 50 small wildfires across western Montana in just 2 days. The Flathead area is especially hit hard, and officials begin to worry about whether they have enough people should the worst happen. July 27th, 3 fires take center stage. In Sanders County, a recreational vehicle's brakes overheat near Hot Springs and start a fire named the Narada. It rapidly grows into the state's largest blaze at 3,000 acres. It also becomes the first fire to claim structures, including an old schoolhouse.
The priorities have been elsewhere up until recently with the major drought conditions and fire severity they have in the southwest and Colorado. We're starting to move into those same conditions today.
Meanwhile, near Plains, high winds and heat fan the Henry Peak fire into a blow-up. In a matter of hours, it triples in size to 1,000 acres and forces the evacuation of homes in the McLaughlin Creek drainage.
It's a different story when your own home is threatened. As a firefighter, it seems like you're always looking for a fire to make that extra money, that hazard pay. And when it's your own home, you kind of seem to forget about the hazard pay and the overtime. You just want to get the fire out.
We are going around and talking to the people and making sure that they're aware of what the situation is. We do not anticipate any more evacuations, but people need to be prepared and they need to be ready to move out when told to do so.
And near Missoula, residents of Grant Creek get a scare from a fire burning near the Snow Bowl ski area. The fire draws an intensive response, with aircraft dropping water and retardant. Finally, after a tense afternoon and evening, the fire is stopped a quarter-mile away from homes.
I think you've seen tremendous firefighting efforts, though, this afternoon. I mean, talk about a mass group of firefighters coming together, and the Borate bombers and the helicopters with water, and it's just been very impressive for us to be able to see this pull together and to get organized as quickly as we can.
For the next few days, the Henry Peak and Narada blazes dominate the firescape. The Henry Peak fire explodes from 1,000 acres to more than 6,000. By month's end, more than 1,000 people will be fighting it. As the situation escalates, fire bosses still face a shortage of available people and equipment.
Firefighters typically are can-do kind of people, and it is really frustrating for all of us to be in a position where we're having to sit and wait for resources before we can be effective, and so that's very difficult.
Meanwhile, the Narada increases in size by 50% to almost 4,500 acres. At the same time, hundreds of lightning strikes trigger dozens of new small fires. Among the hotspots, the 9 Mile area west of Missoula.
We had several starts early this morning. Around 8 o'clock this morning, we had thunder and lightning, and we've got about 20 new starts since last night.
Already the situation is severe enough to bring comparisons with the disastrous 1988 fire season. On July 29th, Governor Mark Roscoe takes an aerial tour over some of the damaged areas. Then, just hours later, another airplane carries fresh tragedy and turns an already bad situation into something worse.
Well, we've been here almost all day and watching all the fire bombers come and go. We watched this one orbit about 3 times, and then he dumped his load before he even got close to the fire, and then he started up that canyon. Next thing we saw, he was stalling it into the trees. And then there was a big fireball, and that was it.
The next day, Missoula would know that the crash had claimed one of its own. Pilot Randy Lynn.
Working with the retardant industry over the last 30-some years that I've been involved in firefighting, you know, it's a very risky occupation. They fly in probably the worst conditions, mountains, high temperatures, a lot of turbulence, and with aircraft that aren't the most up-to-date modern. That morning I'd visited with the flight crew of that aircraft just to see how things were going, because they had just moved up here from Arizona, New Mexico, and had flown a lot of hours down there. And I was just visiting with them to see how their conditions were and how they were feeling about, you know, continued fast-paced kinds of activity.
The other victim was pilot Bob Kelly of New Mexico. Kelly had been a hero of a fire in autumn of 1991. That blaze had spread from Missoula's Louisiana Pacific particle board plant and seemed poised to sweep over a grassy saddle into the heavily populated Rattlesnake area. Well, Kelly's retardant drop stopped the fire at Interstate 90 and saved the day. In the aftermath of the crash, the Forest Service temporarily shuts down flights of all firefighting aircraft. But on the ground, cooler weather allows crews to make some good progress. The Narada fire is declared contained on July 30th, and even the Henry Peak blaze seems on the verge of being tamed after spreading to more than 8,000 acres. But new fires continue to put a strain on available people and equipment. Among them, the Beaver Slough fire along Fish Creek Road west of Alverton. It grows to almost 1,000 acres before firefighters can begin making headway. New starts are also reported on the Kootenai Forest and on the eastern edge of Glacier National Park. There appears to be no end in sight. July turns into August. The hottest and most volatile portion of the fire season looms ahead. And as flags across Montana fly at half-mast, another memorial service begins. Western Montana began to look like a war zone in mid-July, and in a way, it was. Us against the fires. Helicopters and slurry bombers raced across the sky. Weary firefighters came off the lines after a day of battle where resources were already beginning to run thin. And then, the Army arrived to lend personnel support.
This is for us a mission like any other mission we could be given, and we're here to do what the Army's done for over 100 years. We're not here to come in like the cavalry to try to save the wagon train. We're here to do the mission the Army's always done, and that's protect the lives and the property of the American people. My soldiers are very excited about being here. Of course, no one is happy to be away from their families, but they're very excited about this mission, and we come in to work with the Forestry Service people, very good professionals that we've already done training with, and as a team together, we'll do what's necessary to bring these fires under control. Then I'll take my soldiers back to Fort Hood, Texas, and we'll continue to train to do the other kinds of things that we do.
Shortly after landing at the Missoula County Airport, the Texas troops were almost immediately put to work. Many set up camp at the Frenchtown Fire Camp at the high school. We're told it's one of the more luxurious setups to be found this summer. We spent some time with some firefighters from across the West one summer night. As the sun went down this warm July night in the middle of the fire season, firefighters from Alaska took advantage of some rare free time to toss the football around, to think of something other than fire. Some decided to curl up in their temporary huts for some sleep. Others were able to make a free phone call home just to let loved ones know they were okay. Life at a fire camp. To many, it's an adventure. Many have never been to Montana before, like Richard Johnson from Camden, Alabama, who says Montana took some getting used to.
Well, it's been pretty country, but it's been mighty steep. It's been about the steepest terrain I've ever walked on. Well, that goes a lot of rocks falling and stuff like that, kind of hazardous.
The crew from the Alabama Forestry Commission helped stop the fire on Grant Creek and in the 9 Mile complex. They were there when the slurry bomber carrying Randy Lynn and Bob Kelly went down.
It was just kind of a shock, you know, because it was a fellow firefighter, you know, go down, you know, whenever they crash. It just, really, I guess it kind of hits everybody. It's a little bit part of a shock.
The makeshift fire camp at Frenchtown was probably one of the most comfortable camps around. Usually fire camps are a flattened spot in some mountain field. Nevertheless, there is the element of roughing it. Our Alabama friend has some advice for anybody interested in this kind of life.
Bring a blanket with you. Because we spent a couple nights without sleeping bags and stuff like that, and that's kind of cool. But other than that, it ain't too bad. You know, just some long hours, come in, eat, go to sleep.
Fire camps, an integral part of winning the battle against forest fires. They've been around for decades. They'll be around for decades more. As the summer wears on, more troops will come to Montana. In mid-August, a full battalion of Army troops arrive with another battalion waiting in the wings in Idaho. 500 Marines ship off to the Kootenai Forest, and another 500 soldiers show up in the Flathead. Montana also welcomes top government officials to the fire line. In late August, Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt arrives in the Flathead with a hotshot fire crew from Alaska. Besides taking a look at the fire situation, Babbitt is prepared to work on the fire line.
We have to contain these fires, and particularly in a really intense fire season where the risk is so great, we really have no choice but to move in and do everything we can to suppress the fires.
The fire line in northwest Montana also draws the chief of the Forest Service, Jack Ward Thomas. After spending a night in a tent, Thomas flies to Missoula to take part in a daily briefing at the aerial fire depot. In a subsequent press conference, Thomas talks about the courage, hard work, and safety of his firefighting employees.
This has been a particularly bad year, but our safety record overall is very, very good, and we constantly are striving to upgrade that. We will look at all of these accidents very thoroughly, see what we can do to minimize that risk. Now, one thing I do want to make clear, though, firefighting is an incredibly dangerous occupation. Those people on wildland fires are looking at circumstances where they're in heavy fuels. This is a very dry year. The topography is steep. Jumping out of airplanes has some inherent risk. So anytime we go at these things, we need to understand that we are sending people in harm's way. That's a given to this business. But our job is to make sure that the people we send in harm's way have got the best possible training and equipment and tactics and leadership necessary to make sure that we do the job with the least possible risk.
August 5th, fire once again strikes close to Missoula, this time along Interstate 90 west of Reserve Street. The flames begin burning in the median, but quickly move uphill toward homes.
The fire started apparently in the median between the two lanes of the interstate, spread across the road, across the north lane or north side, onto the hillside, and then into the Good and Kyle area, and then up over the hill towards Grant Creek.
Fire officials prepare to evacuate residents, but precise drops of water and retardant allow crews to stop the fire and prevent that evacuation.
The retardant is cut that running fire off, and we got that shut down real quick. And on the other end, the engines got in to protect the houses and cut the fire off there. So it's get to them and slap them down fast before they get too big.
That same night, winds pushed a lightning fire near Ovando over fire lines. By Saturday, August 6th, the Chamberlain fire is estimated to be at 1,100 acres and is racing through heavy timber. With the Henry Peak and Narada fires now inactive, the Chamberlain takes over as the largest uncontrolled fire burning in the state. For the moment, it also draws the most attention of any fire in Montana. Meanwhile, fires are also growing in the Bitterroot and in Glacier Park. Fires are also sprouting in eastern Montana, on the Crow Indian Reservation, and along Fort Peck Reservoir in northeastern Montana. Outside Montana's borders, large fires near Payette Lake, Idaho begin to swell and send their smoke east toward Missoula. Firefighters also began responding to small fires in Yellowstone National Park. The weekend of August 13th and 14th brings more bad news. Winds, heat, and lightning force red flag warnings. The Chamberlain fire near Ovando jumps its containment line. In the Flathead, the Lost Trail blaze also breaks loose and rushes across more than 1,000 acres. The weekend also brings news of yet another firefighting tragedy. A C-130 retardant bomber crashes 85 miles northeast of Los Angeles, California. All 3 people aboard are killed. And by Monday, Missoula gets word that one of them is Lolo pilot Robert Buck. August bakes on toward what normally is the hottest and driest time of fire season, and activity increases in the Flathead area. The Lost Trail fire remains uncontained, and large new fires rage on both the Flathead and Kootenai National Forests. By August 16th, the Kootenai alone reports almost 200 new starts. Closer to Missoula, the McDonald fire near Dixon takes just 24 hours to become the largest uncontrolled blaze in the state and threatens the town for a time. Eventually, the McDonald blaze will cover 8,000 acres before it's controlled.
Trying to keep the front edge of the fire cooled down so that the hand crews and also the dozers can get around the front of the fire. And the slurry just cools it down in time for them to do their work.
By this time, even residents who can't see fires from their homes or businesses can see the effects of them. Smoke descends into mountain valleys, turning the setting sun into a crimson ball. It began on August 15th, 20 miles west of Whitefish, and by the next day, it had roared through 3,500 acres of timber. Its name is the Little Wolf Fire.
Well, this fire was actually started, I guess, night before last, and some initial lines were put in, but we didn't have the support troops to be able to maintain those lines, and with the winds we had and the extreme low humidities as well as the high temperatures, it was just a combination that the fire itself just blew out and ran away. We estimated it ran about 1.5 miles or 2 miles in about 2.5 hours.
August 17th, the Little Wolf almost doubles to 6,000 acres and crews begin scratching a line around it. August 18th, the fire is now at 8,500 acres and is approaching homes in the Star Meadows area. Fire crews, favorable weather, hold the fire back for a couple of days. But on August 21st, the fire makes a move, and officials give the residents of Star Meadows their first notice to get out of the way.
I plan to stay right here, and that's in the process of doing a few things. We've been moving the ground and anything inflammable away from the bases of buildings so that if there's a fallout with fire coming down and starts a fire, it won't run up the side of your building. That's what Rick said we should do, and we're doing that. And there's places where there's been piles of slash close to the building. I've covered that with dirt. I have a little, like a bobcat there, and I use that to cover it. So we've been doing a lot of that sort of work around here.
Little Wolf is now the nation's #1 fire priority, but it's not the only fire approaching homes. 37 homes near Libby also lie in the path of this scenery fire, part of the so-called Wilderness Fire Complex.
Well, we had a predicted wind event, 25 to 30 mile an hour winds. We knew it was coming. We had to sit here and wait for it. And it started moving the fire very actively. And we had some houses up here in Cedar Creek, which were right in the way of it had it kept going.
By this time, the numbers are adding up to records. 3,300 individual fires, more than in all of 1988. However, the numbers of acres burned in Montana and Yellowstone is estimated at 50,000 acres, just 2% of 1988's total. But the all-out effort to fight the fire has exacted a heavy price. The state's fund to battle wildfires, $5 million, is almost gone. While the bulk of the fire activity has been west of the Continental Divide, some major blazes light up eastern Montana. Among them, the Windy Point Fire, southwest of Lewistown, where observers stand back to watch its wall of flame. Near Big Timber, gusty, swirling winds whip up the Black Butte Fire, but firefighters eventually get the upper hand. North of Yellowstone Park, the DECKARD's Flats Fire burns perilously close to the town of Jardine. Firefighters take up defensive positions, but positive weather conditions put a damper on the threat. And then there is the Baby Dean Fire on the northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation. It blackens 20,000 acres in less than a day's time. And twice in one day, flames roll back on members of a bulldozer crew, forcing them into their emergency fire shelters. They escape injury. August 22nd, the number of acres on fire jumps dramatically, driven on by high winds. On the Kootenai Forest alone, 26,000 acres are burning within 40 miles of Libby, and one blaze is within a mile of homes. Meanwhile, the Little Wolf fire is slowing down. By August 24th, crews have created a line around 3/4 of that blaze. And by August 25th, the evacuation request is downgraded to a warning, and residents begin returning to their homes. Progress continues over the next several days, and on September 1st, Little Wolf is declared contained. Meanwhile, retardant bombers cross the 1 million gallon mark and are fast approaching 1988's record of 1,100,000 gallons. Autumn begins, and the fire season stretches on. September 25th, near Hamilton, a blaze on Ward Mountain flares up, its flames clearly visible from town. Once again, homes lie in harm's way.
The danger is that the fire would continue to move downhill towards those homes. And so that's where our emphasis are right now with the retardant drops, is trying to protect the homes and private property along the interface boundary.
Primary concern is still that we get a line across the bottom of it so that we can secure it from coming down the hill towards the residents, and that's still our primary objective. And we expect it's probably going to take through tomorrow to meet that objective.
As firefighters launch air and ground attacks on Ward Mountain, smoke from another fire blankets Missoula once again. This time the culprit is the SIAM fire along the Idaho border near Fish Creek. And in Glacier Park, 3 fires merge into one in the North Fork area, forcing road closures inside the park. In a normal year, the end of September brings with it the end of the fire season. But this year, as the calendar changes to October, the fire season is extended indefinitely. October does bring good news, though. The Ward Mountain fire is on the edge of containment, and homes are no longer in danger. Finally, on October 12th, state fire officials declared the season over.
This season was different, and I think it was the entire West being engaged in active, high-intensity fire suppression at the same time. Normally, the seasons in Arizona and New Mexico are pretty much done by the last of June when their monsoon rain season sets in. This year, that didn't occur. Colorado and eastern Utah is normally not a thing that you even need to consider, or an area that you need to consider being in much of a fire business sort of way. This year, they were very busy. They required and utilized a lot of initial attack and a lot of large fire suppression forces. That was going on at the same time that we were just starting. And then Nevada and southern Utah and southern Idaho kicked in. Even California, Northern California got into the act, eastern Washington. And the supply train was almost empty. And then here we started off with 200 new fires one day, 300 the next, 400 the day after that. And that was a very unusual situation, to have the entire West engaged at the same time with so many fires burning. And I guess the other thing that was different about this summer was the way that the regular firefighting force and the volunteers, the people that I'd mentioned earlier, responded. Even though we had 5,000 fires, twice the normal number of fires per year, we were still successful in doing a good initial attack, keeping fires small on 97% of those. So out of the 5,000, there were only about 150 that became fires of significance, the ones that made the news.
The final tallies, almost 4,500 separate fires. Acreage burned, almost 290,000. That's only 11% of the acreage burned in the 1988 fire season, but the cost of suppressing this year's fires, a staggering $100 million. 1/5 of that cost, $20 million, has come from the state coffers, virtually depleting Montana's entire budget for forestry operations for fiscal year 1995. Reimbursements from the Forest Service will help offset some of that cost, as will $3.5 million in federal emergency assistance. But state expenditures on fires sets a new record, and officials already are preparing to ask the 1995 legislature for a major budget supplement to get through until the end of the fiscal year next June.
you know, when you're busy with the heat of the action, of course, the first concern is the protection of lives and property and doing an effective job of fire suppression. But always in the back of your mind is how much money are we spending? And this year we are spending an enormous amount of money. 1988 had been our highest year of suppression expenditures up until now, and I think the total was around $12 million. Probably a more normal year would be somewhere maybe $3 million. This year we've already reached 25 million, or we should be reaching 25 million this week. And it's really, may not seem like a lot of money for government in some ways, but for Montana, that's an enormous amount of money. Now that won't be the total cost to government, because some of that cost we will bill out to other agencies and recoup some of that. We've also had an emergency declaration, or disaster declaration rather, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which will provide us some federal funding to offset some of our costs. But still, in total, this is going to be a year of an enormously large expenditure for fire suppression.
Homes were threatened by the Ward Mountain fire, as other homes have been in other fires that raged across the state this fire season. Evacuation was often on the tongues of fire officials, and as more people build their homes deeper into the woods, the urban-wildland interface becomes more of an issue. All agree it is going to take teamwork to make sure civilization and wildlands can coexist without disaster.
Years ago, there were very few homes up in here. The expansion of the community, particularly into this urban interface, has dictated the need for such plans. We have been for several years saying that this is going to occur. The proof is here.
The problem with many homes is that the roads leading to them are narrow, rocky, windy, and steep. Difficult for even a small car to maneuver. Imagine what it must be like for a fire engine. And even if the fire engine were to make it up the road, then it might not have a place to turn around. So there's two problems. The home is in danger, and the fire engine is in danger, as well as the crew, because they might not have a way to escape. There are no ordinances to force a homeowner to keep property clear of fuels or to install tile roofing, for example, to help fireproof a house. Officials say education is the first step to safety.
There's some short-term trade-offs that you have to make to have some long-term benefits, and reduction of some of the green trees to save having all the trees be black is some of the things that we've been talking to people about.
Federal, state, and local agencies realize that homes will continue to pop up among the trees as more seek a rural lifestyle. They believe that communication before a fire will help ensure the urban-wildland interface does not spell disaster for those who build their homes in the woods. If you didn't know the story of Man Gulch before this summer, chances are you now know the tale of 12 Montana smoke jumpers who died in August 1949 while fighting a fire north of Helena at a place called Man Gulch. The next time that many people would die fighting a forest fire would be during the summer of 1994 on Storm King in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Ian Marquand has the story of one girl's fascination with what happened at Man Gulch that hot August day. Okay, I'm ready.
Her name is Bridget Tenner.
You been excited? Yeah, really excited.
She's 13 years old and lives outside Chicago. She's come to Montana following the call of a remote hillside in a place called Man Gulch.
Here, there's a triangle here which, a triangle here shows the
Man Gulch
fire.
Oh, I see.
But it shows it up.
For the U.S. Forest Service, Man Gulch is synonymous with courage, controversy, and death. 45 years ago, a wall of flame on this slope killed 13 Forest Service smoke jumpers, the first of that elite group to die by fire. They are remembered at a memorial a short distance up the Missouri River in the historic Gates of the Mountains area. It was this scenic spot the jumpers were ordered to save when they parachuted into Man Gulch on August 5, 1949. Once on the ground, the 16 firefighters headed toward the river, but a sudden blow-up of fire blocked their path and sent a wall of flame racing uphill toward them. They turned, dropped their hand tools, and scrambled up the gulch's rocky north slope. But the fire closed the gap, so Foreman Wag Dodge made a final desperate gamble. He lit his own small fire and lay face down in the charred soil. For whatever reason, the smoke jumpers did not follow their leader into the ashes. Instead, they ran, every man for himself. Minutes later, 11 lay dead, 2 sat burned and dying, and 3 stood alive. Among them, Wag Dodge.
This tree right here is in this photograph, just as clear as can be. Come here.
Bridget's desire to walk in the footsteps of victims and survivors was sparked by the late Norman McLean, whose own obsession with the Man Gulch tragedy is chronicled in his final work, Young Men and Fire.
I just read the book and I loved the story, and I don't know, it was really interesting, and everything about it interests me, all the mystery in it and all the controversies and just what happened and what they did, and how some of them survived and some of them didn't, and all the things they must have thought when running, you know, I gotta get out of here and stuff. I think that's what interested me.
Well, it's interesting to note how a young child's mind develops, and how a young child's mind could pick on a subject and really go through it and go to the core of it and get to the core of it.
I think people like to learn, they like to hear other people's tragedies. I'm trying to figure out why I like this story myself, and what it would be that somebody who's a different generation from me found so interesting in it. And it sort of touches the humanness in us all.
Bridget's fascination led to a school research project on Man Gulch. This trip is a gift from her family and from McLean's research partner, former smoke jumper Laird Robinson.
Any 8th grader that takes the interest in something that's as near and dear to my heart as this particular fire was, I wouldn't pass up the chance. This Missouri River country is I'd love to come in here. It's harsh, prickly pear cactus, rattlesnakes, steep, blazing hot in the summer, but I love that. I love the beauty but the harshness of this country we're in here.
I found this tin, but I'm not sure what it goes to. And it was right under this stuff right back here.
I would say that it's probably Vienna sausages, was what it was. So obviously at the point of drop-heavy tools, which we're standing at, whoever was here decided to get rid of some food too. This ought to tell you something. At this point, the group has several problems. The crew is pretty much all together. The fire is approximately 200 yards behind them with flame lengths in excess of 50 feet. They now realize at this point, and Dodge the foreman in particular, that the fire is winning. It has closed the gap. The fire is closing at less than 100 yards behind them now, and the crew's strung out. So Wag lit this fire with the idea of letting it burn out and getting the crew to come in with him and lie down in the burnt out area. Someone made a statement in the group that was standing there and said, "To hell with this, I'm getting out of here."
From Dodge's fire, we moved straight uphill, retracing the footsteps of 2 particular jumpers. Robert Salee and Walter Rumsey were not experienced, but they were lucky. Amid choking smoke and heat, they found a passage out of Man Gulch and survived. There was another jumper here too, a veteran named Eldon Dietert. He watched Salee and Rumsey slip through the rocks, and then he turned away.
The Dietert boy, who was an experienced jumper, who was a very good student, and who basically looked over his shoulder and saw his seasoned jumper friends taking another route, I believe I would have probably followed the route the Dietert boy took.
You would have died, though.
Well, hindsight, you would have died, but they didn't know at the time, but what they weren't going into more fire over on the other side of the ridge in Rescue Gulch.
Just above Salee and Rumsey's passageway, our group reaches the top and finds exhilaration.
Whoa! Ah, how come we didn't come up with
Whoa! Person to see helmets cross.
What? It's another world, isn't it?
It's nothing like I thought it would be. After reading the book, I had a picture of what I thought it would be like. It's nothing like that. It's a lot bigger and greener than I thought it would be, and steeper, a lot steeper. But it's just really amazing to finally be here.
As we reach the crosses, the talk turns from survivors to those who fell. Some running, others exhausted, still others who simply let the flames embrace them. There will always be those who remember the young men of Man Gulch. And now a new generation will recall the names, the story, and the legacy.
I've been thinking about, what's it going to be like to finally be here. And to be here, it's really, really good. It's really, it's interesting and it's amazing and it's way different than I thought it would be. But I really like being here.
I feel their heart and I feel their mind. I don't feel the terror that they must have felt under the situation and circumstances when they were here, but strong, powerful kids, by all means, basically trying to survive, every man for himself.
There's something about this story that's quite extraordinary, and I think this place certainly reflects that.
And I'm glad I did it because I really like being up here.
So now that the fire season is over, what's next? Well, officials from the Forest Service and the Department of State Lands are already looking to next year, and they tell us if we don't get a lot of wet, heavy snow, we could see another fire season next summer like we did this year. Events such as the Storm King disaster and the crash on Squaw Peak are events that officials learn from, as every year they review their policies and procedures. So for now, keep your fingers crossed that this winter will spell relief to Montana's parched forest lands and spell relief to those who fight fire in the big sky.